let's be clear, that ain't HIIT. In this video, I'm gonna break down what HIIT is, where people make a lot of mistakes with it, and then give you examples of how you can get more out of it. When we look at what HIIT is, it's high intensity interval training. So we're doing intervals where we're alternating between work and rest at a high intensity. That's the key thing. The earliest concept of HIIT that we know about originates back in the 1920s with Paavo Nurmi, the famous flying Finn who reported doing HIIT-style training and broke multiple world records in running. Ever since that time, HIIT has progressively grew in fame, especially when the Tabata protocol came out in the late 90s, leading to the Tabata craze. When we consider why people do HIIT, it has the same general benefits as other exercise, like helping in weight management and also keeping your heart healthy. But in addition to these things, it has a few other key benefits. HIIT training can be very time efficient. You're able to do a lot of work, burn a ton of calories, cover a lot of distance in a much shorter amount of time than you would with low or moderate intensity exercise. Another benefit of HIIT is this thing called EPOC. Let's jump to the whiteboard so I can break it down for you. So we got this wonderful graph that I made, and when we're looking at this, we've got two options. We call medium intensity continuous training, or what most people do for cardio, and then on the flip side, we've got HIIT. So now when we're looking at this, we've got oxygen consumption, which is very similar to essentially the amount of calories being burned, and then time. A key thing that differs between this and this is when we're looking at this, where you start to burn a lot of calories while you're in training, then you transition to this time where you stop training. And what occurs with moderate intensity training is that you have this quick drop off where you're no longer consuming as much oxygen, so the calorie burn that you're having once you stop training drops off very quickly. On the flip side, with high intensity training, we have a different representation where we have the same relative increase, all those variables are the same during training, but then when you stop training, we have this excess post-oxygen consumption that's elevated. And that means that when you're not training, you're actually burning more calories than in the other situation. So this is a really good benefit to where with HIIT training, you burn more calories through the rest of the day than you would with other types of cardio. Now the last benefit of HIIT training is that it helps to encourage better retention of muscle mass. Lower intensity forms of cardio can actually help us to lose muscle as they will utilize our protein content in our muscles as a form of fuel across time. Whereas with HIIT training, because of the high intensity, it can help us encourage retention of our muscle mass. If you go and look at most HIIT workouts, what you're gonna see is individuals doing bodyweight or lightweight exercises done at a fast-ish pace for somewhere between 5 and 45 minutes. While this isn't inherently bad, it's not HIIT. It's either gonna be moderate continuous exercise or at best interval weight training. Now, why does this matter? At the end of the day, if you want the benefits of doing HIIT training, you gotta do HIIT training. Other forms of exercise like moderate continuous, circuit training, etc., they don't necessarily offer those same benefits. So if you want those key things we talked about earlier, you gotta properly do HIIT. Now, how do you properly do HIIT? Well, let's go back to the whiteboard. Now, when we're looking at high intensity interval training, we can think about the programming prescription upon two main characteristics. As we said, it's high intensity and it's interval training. So on the high intensity side of things, we wanna make sure that we get our intensity above 80% as the minimum. In the vast majority of research, we see the recommendations of 85 to 95% of heart rate max. So this means that throughout it, you should be working at such a high pace, you cannot maintain a conversation. You should be gasping for breath as you go through your sets. On the other side of the equation, we've got the interval aspect of it. And here we're looking at most of your work sets being less than or equal to 4 minutes. Generally, you're gonna be probably in the more the 30 seconds up to 4 minute range, with 4 minutes being the absolute cap if you're doing this right. And that's because, as we mentioned, the intensity needs to be high. You cannot sustain a high intensity for that long. So if you're passing 4 minutes, you're probably not doing high intensity. Then your rest should be active. So if you're on a treadmill, when you're doing your running and you're gonna then take a break, you should be walking or a light jog. If you're on the bike, doing something similar where you just slow down intensity. If you're doing other forms, just try to slow down essentially. You wanna try to recover till your heart rate gets back to where its baseline is. That way you know for sure that you're prepared for your next set. You don't wanna have a negative ratio. Generally, you wanna have a similar amount of recovery as your work set. And then for number of sets, it depends upon how long you're going and how intense it is. For most people, doing somewhere between 4 and 12 is gonna give you a sufficient workout. If they're longer intervals, you're probably gonna be on that lower end. If they're shorter intervals, on that higher end. So let's give you a few examples to break this down further. Now in example 1, I'm gonna use the AirRunner here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run for 90 seconds, going towards around a 90% effort, and then I'm gonna rest 90 seconds between. So during that 90 seconds, I'm gonna be pushing hard, watching the distance I cover, and then from there, I'll rest that 90 seconds, which should allow me enough time to fully recover, and then on the next set, I'm gonna try to match that distance. And each of the sets that I repeat, I'm gonna try to keep that distance. That way I know my effort is staying high through all of the sets. I'm gonna try to do about 8 sets total, so let's smash it. That was hard. Yeah. All right, now we're gonna look at example 2. For this, we're gonna use the assault bike. Now our game plan here is that we're gonna go max effort. Again, we want that high intensity. So with high intensity going towards the maximum, we gotta reduce our work time. For this, we're gonna do 10 sets of 30 seconds, maximum effort with 60 seconds of recovery. Again, if you have a really high intensity, you need a longer duration of recovery. So with that high intensity, we're gonna double our recovery time. That way we know by the second set, we should be relatively recovered. And then across the 10 sets, it will gradually diminish, but you should still be able to maintain a pretty good output. I'm gonna track the calories that I burn on each set and try to match that each time. So let's hit our first one. So, set 1. See you guys in 9 sets. We're gonna die. That's rough. Like I mentioned, if you're going max effort, you should look like this. So push your pace. Now, a common question individuals will ask is, can I do this with weights? Isn't CrossFit high intensity intervals? Yes and no. The challenge with this is that when we look at the adaptations that we can get from doing this HIIT type workouts like we just showed, you're not necessarily gonna get that with weights unless you utilize weights that are light enough that you can move very quickly and do movements that are either total body or you rotate through different movements that allow you to work your whole body relatively quickly. For instance, if you were to do a whole bunch of air squats and then go into some push-ups, unless those were being alternating back and forth with a relatively fast pace of reps, you're not going to be able to keep that as a high intensity type training session like what we showed. If you were doing 3 sets of push-ups, 3 sets of air squats, going back and forth, maybe. But otherwise, you won't get the same type of response from your whole body and challenge the same metabolic pathways that we just showed. So with that, generally, weights are still beneficial. Doing that circuit type training that's common in CrossFit is still beneficial, but it's not the same thing. Let's summarize. High intensity interval training is awesome. It has lots of benefits. You can get so much out of it in a relatively quick time. You get the benefits of EPOC, you get the ability to retain muscle mass, and so much more. But the way most people do it doesn't deliver those benefits. So make sure you watch the video, check out the right ways to do it, and implement them. One last tip from Broden, make sure you don't mess up EPOC and TUPOC. At the end of the day, one's got great rhymes, the other is bad times. See you in the next video, folks. Make sure to subscribe and like this video. So, assault bike, huh? It's easy.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know.